The warm winds of Baja California swept across the sprawling estate of Alejandro Mendoza, a mansion perched on the edge of a cliff, overlooking the endless blue of the Pacific Ocean. It was a view that many would envy, but Alejandro didn't care for it anymore. At 50, he had everything money could buy, yet he had never felt so alone. The mansion, with its grand hallways and sprawling gardens, was eerily quiet. The only sound that filled the empty rooms was the soft hum of the air conditioning, trying to fight back the relentless heat of the Mexican summer. Alejandro had been a successful businessman, a self-made millionaire, the envy of everyone in Mexico City. But a car accident 15 years ago had left him paralyzed from the waist down, stealing from him not just his ability to walk, but his spirit as well. He'd spent the past decade in search of a cure, traveling to the best doctors, trying experimental treatments, and sinking millions into his pursuit of walking again. But nothing worked. The doctors were kind, but the words they spoke were always the same. There is nothing we can do. His fortune, close to 30 million pesos, meant nothing when his legs wouldn't obey him. His wife had left him shortly after the accident, unable to bear his anger, his bitterness, and his relentless pursuit of a life that could never be his again. His friends, too, had distanced themselves, unsure how to handle his dark moods and the weight of his failure. Even his elderly mother, Mariela, visited less frequently, her heart breaking each time she saw the once proud man reduced to a shadow of himself. Alejandro stared out the window, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. He wanted to feel something, anything, but all he felt was emptiness. That evening, as he wheeled himself into the dining room, he glanced at the table set for one. He couldn't remember the last time he had a meaningful conversation with anyone. The housekeeper, Dolores, had left for the night, and Alejandro found himself once again alone, facing a plate of food he wouldn't eat. He was about to push the plate away when a soft knock echoed through the house. It was faint, almost hesitant, and it immediately caught his attention. Who could be at the door at this hour? Alejandro wondered. The house was isolated, tucked away from the town. But the knock came again, gentle but persistent, breaking the monotony of his thoughts. Against his usual desire for solitude, Alejandro found himself wheeling toward the front door, curiosity stirring within him. He had almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone knock on his door. When he opened the door, he saw a small figure standing before him, bundled in a thin jacket that did little to shield her from the night chill. She was no older than 6, with dark brown eyes and hair that looked like it hadn't seen a brush in weeks. Her shoes were old and worn, with holes in the soles. Alejandro felt a wave of confusion. Who was this child, and why was she here? "Señor," the little girl said, her voice quiet but clear, "I'm really hungry. Do you have any food you're not going to eat?" Alejandro blinked in disbelief. No one had ever asked him for food before, especially not in such a straightforward way. In all his years of wealth, no one had ever knocked on his door with such a humble request. "What are you doing out here alone?" he asked, his voice gruff from years of disuse. The girl didn't flinch. "I live with my mama," she said, pointing across the street to a dilapidated apartment building. "She's working late and I got hungry. Señora Isabel next door said, 'Rich people throw away food all the time.'" Alejandro felt a strange pull in his chest. He stared at the girl, her bright eyes watching him without fear or judgment. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a prisoner in his own life. She wasn't looking at him like he was a broken millionaire. She was simply asking for help. "What's your name?" Alejandro asked, unable to stop himself. "Isabella," the little girl said, smiling. "What's yours?" "Alejandro." "You can call me Alejandro." For a brief moment, Alejandro felt something stir inside him. It was as if a door had creaked open, a door he hadn't even known was locked. It was a small feeling, but it was real. Isabella stepped closer, her small hands outstretched. "I can make you a deal, Señor Alejandro," she said, her tone serious beyond her years. You give me some of your food, and I'll give you something better. Alejandro raised an eyebrow, surprised by her confidence. What could you possibly give me, little one? I can make you walk again, she said, her voice so certain that Alejandro felt a chill run down his spine. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. For a moment, he felt the familiar rush of anger rise in his chest. He had heard it all before: faith healers, so-called miracle workers, doctors who promised impossible cures. But as he looked into Isabella's eyes, something about her made him pause. There was no greed in her gaze, no trickery, just a quiet, unwavering certainty. How? Alejandro finally asked, his voice hoarse. Isabella didn't hesitate. I just know. I can do it. I've done it before. Alejandro let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. You think you can make me walk? I know I can, she said simply. As she turned to leave, Alejandro watched her disappear into the night, his mind spinning with her impossible promise. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this little girl might just be the answer to something he hadn't dared to hope for in years. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Alejandro's mansion, casting long shadows across the floor as he sat in his study. He hadn't been able to shake the thought of Isabella's words. I can make you walk again. The thought lingered in his mind, refusing to let go. It seemed absurd, impossible even, but there was something in the way she had said it that made him wonder if, just maybe, there was more to her claim than met the eye. Alejandro had spent the entire night replaying the conversation over and over in his mind, caught between skepticism and something else, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. It had been so long since he had dared to hope for anything. After the accident, hope had seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. His wealth, his connections, none of it mattered in the face of his paralysis. His life had become a series of endless doctor visits, experimental treatments, and empty promises. His body had betrayed him, and he had no choice but to accept it. But last night, a little girl had knocked on his door and offered him something no one else had: a real chance at the impossible. Just as Alejandro was about to push the thought aside, a knock echoed through the house. A soft, familiar tap on the servant's door. Alejandro wheeled himself toward it, curiosity bubbling up inside him. He didn't know why, but he found himself hoping it was Isabella again. When he opened the door, there she was, standing just as she had the night before, her jacket still too thin for the cold morning, her face bright with anticipation. Good morning, Señor Alejandro, she said cheerfully, her voice light as if she hadn't just made the most impossible promise the night before. I brought you something. Alejandro raised an eyebrow. You brought me something? Isabella nodded eagerly and held out a small, crumpled flower. It was clearly something she had picked from a nearby garden. Small, fragile, and perhaps a little wilted, but it was a gift, nonetheless. My mama says that when someone does something nice for you, you should give them something back, Isabella explained, her blue eyes sparkling with sincerity. This is for the dinner you gave me. Alejandro's heart softened as he took the flower from her, surprised by the gesture. Thank you, Isabella, he said quietly. That's very kind of you. The little girl smiled, her innocence radiating. For the first time in years, Alejandro felt a flicker of warmth that wasn't tied to anger or bitterness. His heart, which had long been locked away, seemed to crack open just a little. Isabella didn't stop there. Can I see your legs? She asked suddenly, her tone casual but inquisitive. The question would have angered Alejandro if it had come from anyone else. But from Isabella, it seemed like simple curiosity, not an interrogation. He hesitated for a moment before reluctantly agreeing. They don't work, he said, his voice heavy. I can't feel them at all. Isabella, without hesitation, walked over to him, and gently placed her small hands on his knee. Alejandro tensed at the contact, not because it hurt, but because no one had touched his legs with such care in years. Even his doctors approached them with clinical detachment, but Isabella's touch was warm and comforting. For a moment, Alejandro could have sworn he felt something, a spark, a slight tingle, as if the touch had reached into a part of him that had been dormant for too long. "They're just sleeping," Isabella said matter-of-factly. "When something's really tired, it sleeps for a long time, but it always wakes up eventually." Alejandro looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of his reality. "No, Isabella, my legs are broken. The doctors say they'll never work again." "But doctors don't know everything," she said confidently, her face serious. "My mama told me that when I was really little, I couldn't talk. The doctors said something was wrong with my brain. But then one day, I just started talking. I started talking all the time." Alejandro's eyes softened as he listened to her. There was something about her that made him want to believe in the impossible, even though he knew better. Isabella's optimism was pure, untainted by the world's cynicism, and for a moment, Alejandro found himself almost willing to entertain the idea that maybe, just maybe, she was right.
"How exactly do you plan to make me walk?" he asked, his voice more curious than skeptical. Isabella grinned and climbed onto the chair opposite him, her legs swinging freely. "First, you have to want to walk for the right reasons." Alejandro furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" "Most people want things for themselves," she explained. "But that's not how magic works. You have to want to walk so you can help other people." Alejandro was silent for a moment, processing her words. What did it mean to walk for someone else? What if walking wasn't about returning to his old life, but about something more, something greater than himself? "I want to walk so I can stop feeling broken," he said finally, his voice filled with a quiet longing. "So I can be the person I used to be." Isabella shook her head, her expression wise beyond her years. "That's wanting something for yourself," she said. "What if you could walk again, but only to help other people? Would you still want it?" The question caught Alejandro off guard. He had never thought of it that way. For 20 years, he had wanted to walk so that he could regain his independence, his dignity, his old life. But what if there was more to it? What if his healing wasn't just about him? What if it was about connecting with others, sharing something greater than his own desires? "I don't know," he admitted, feeling a pang of uncertainty. "That's okay," Isabella said brightly. "We have time to figure it out. Can I come back tomorrow?" Alejandro didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said, his voice soft. "Yes, you can come back." As Isabella skipped toward the door, her tiny voice called back to him. "You should eat your breakfast, Sir Alejandro. You're going to need your strength." For the first time in years, Alejandro felt something stir within him, something that resembled hope. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as broken as he thought. As he sat down to his untouched breakfast, Alejandro realized that he was looking forward to something again. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't dreading the day ahead. Instead, he was curious, what would Isabella bring him tomorrow? And could it be that, after all these years, the impossible might just be within reach? The next morning, Alejandro woke with a strange sense of anticipation. The sun had barely begun to rise over the Pacific when he found himself sitting upright in his wheelchair, staring out at the horizon. The previous day's encounter with Isabella had left an impression on him he couldn't quite shake. There was something about her certainty, her innocence that stirred something deep within him. He had always prided himself on being a logical man, one who trusted in facts and evidence. But something about her words, the way she spoke with such confidence about his recovery, had broken through his carefully constructed walls. Could it really be possible? Could a little girl's faith in magic be the key to unlocking the impossible? As Alejandro prepared for the day, a knock came at the door again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He wheeled himself toward it, his heart quickening in his chest. The door opened, and there stood Isabella, just as she had the night before, her face bright with excitement. "Good morning, Sir Alejandro," she greeted him, her voice full of energy. "I brought you something." Alejandro smiled, the first real smile he had felt in years. "What did you bring me today?" With a grin, Isabella held up a small paper bag. "This is for you," she said, handing it to him. Alejandro took it, curious, and opened it carefully. Inside was a small, delicate stone, smooth and polished, with a deep blue hue that reminded him of the ocean he could see from his window. It was beautiful in its simplicity. "What is this?" he asked, turning the stone over in his hand. "It's a wishing stone," Isabella said, her voice solemn. "My mama told me that when you find a stone like this, it means you're about to make a wish come true." Alejandro chuckled softly, though it was more out of disbelief than amusement. "A wishing stone?" Isabella nodded eagerly, her eyes never leaving his face. "It's magic, Sir Alejandro. But you have to make your wish for the right reason. Not just for yourself, but for others too." Alejandro couldn't help but feel a slight tug in his chest as he listened to her. He had spent so long wishing for things only for himself. His legs to work, his life to return to normal, his independence to be restored. But Isabella's words resonated with something inside him. What if it wasn't about him at all? What if the real wish was about helping someone else? "Do you believe in magic, Sir Alejandro?" Isabella asked, her tone serious. Alejandro hesitated, the question catching him off guard. Magic? He had long stopped believing in such things. Magic was for children, for fairy tales, for things that couldn't exist in the real world. But looking at Isabella's bright eyes, so full of faith and innocence, he wondered if he was missing something. Maybe the magic wasn't in the stone or in the words, it was in the belief itself. "I don't know," he replied slowly, his voice thoughtful. "But maybe it's worth believing in for just a moment." Isabella beamed, her face lighting up with pure joy. "That's the spirit. Now, Sir Alejandro, we need to make a plan. I'm going to help you walk again. But first, we need to start with your heart." Alejandro raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her words. "My heart?" "Yeah," Isabella said excitedly. "You have to open your heart, just like you open a door. When you do that, everything changes. That's what I told you yesterday." Alejandro felt a strange warmth in his chest as he listened to her. Could it be that simple? Was it really about opening his heart, letting go of the bitterness and anger that had held him captive for so long? Could it be that his body would heal if he healed his heart first? "I'm ready," he said, his voice quiet but determined. "What do we do first?" Isabella's eyes sparkled with excitement. "First, we talk. You need to tell me what you want to do when you can walk again." Alejandro thought for a moment, his mind spinning with possibilities. What would he do? For so long, he had been focused only on the idea of walking again for himself so that he could stand, so that he could be independent, so that he could feel whole again. But now, with Isabella's gentle prompting, he began to think about something else. What if walking wasn't just for him? What if it was for someone else, someone who needed him? "I want to help people," he said slowly, the words coming from a place he hadn't visited in years. "I want to be someone who can give back, not just take from others." Isabella smiled brightly, pleased with his answer. "That's the right reason, Sir Alejandro. I knew you could do it." As they sat together in the large, sunlit room, Alejandro felt something shift inside him. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A change, a feeling he hadn't had in years. Hope, yes, but also something deeper. A desire to be more than just the man who had once been a millionaire with everything and nothing at once. He wanted to be someone who made a difference, someone who could help others, not just himself. "I'm ready, Isabella," he said, his voice full of quiet determination. "Let's see what magic we can make." And as Isabella grinned, nodding her approval, Alejandro realized something he hadn't thought possible. He wasn't alone anymore. There was something in him, something he hadn't even realized he had been missing, and that something was slowly beginning to come back to life. Maybe, just maybe, miracles weren't as impossible as he had believed. The next few days unfolded like something Alejandro had never experienced before. His mornings, once filled with the monotony of empty rooms and solitary reflections, now began to pulse with a strange energy. Isabella's visits, once a curious distraction, had become a ritual, a reminder that perhaps he was ready for something beyond his quiet, self-imposed exile. There was a warmth to her presence that he couldn't quite explain, but it made him feel more alive than he had in years each time she visited. Isabella seemed to grow more confident in her approach. Her lessons were simple, but filled with a wisdom that seemed to transcend her age. It wasn't just about physical healing. It was about healing from within, about finding the pieces of himself he had lost and reconnecting with the world around him. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low over the horizon. Alejandro wheeled himself into the garden. He had grown used to the view. There was something calming about the wide expanse of green and the scent of flowers that filled the air. Isabella was sitting on the grass, carefully tending to a patch of flowers she had planted with the groundskeeper's help. She looked up when she saw him approach, her face lighting up with a smile that made something flutter in his chest. "Sir, Alejandro, you're here. Come sit with me," she called, waving him over. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and for a moment, Alejandro felt as though he could leave all his doubts and insecurities behind. She was always so sure, so full of life. He wheeled himself closer, watching as she patted the space beside her. "Come sit. I'll show you how to plant the flowers properly," she said with a playful grin. Alejandro chuckled softly, though he felt a pang of discomfort. "I don't think I know anything about planting flowers, Isabella. That's okay," she said brightly. "You just have to care for them, that's all. And you need patience, just like with people." Her words hit Alejandro in a way he hadn't expected. He thought about the years of bitterness he had carried with him. His anger, his frustration, those had been like weeds, choking any hope he had left. But Isabella's words had a simplicity to them, a truth that made him want to believe in something better. "Maybe you're right," he said softly, reaching down to touch the soil beside her. He marveled at how cool and rich it felt beneath his fingers, the promise of growth hidden within the earth. He wanted to believe that, like these flowers, something within him could still bloom. "Now," Isabella said, her voice turning serious as she took his hands gently, "it's time to start working on your heart, Sir Alejandro. You need to make a choice." He looked up at her, puzzled. "A choice?" Isabella nodded, her eyes focused intently on his. "You've been hiding your heart for so long, afraid it might get hurt. But that's not how it works. You have to open it, just like you opened this garden. Let people in. Let them care about you." Alejandro felt a lump rise in his throat. The words were simple, yet they cut straight to the core of everything he had avoided for so many years. Let people care about you. Could it be that simple? "I've been afraid," he admitted, his voice low. "Afraid that if I let anyone close, I'd lose them, just like I lost everything else." Isabella's gaze softened, and she gently squeezed his hand. "That's the part you have to let go of. People can't help you if you don't let them. You have to trust them." He thought about her mother, how she had always worked hard to take care of Isabella, how she had never hesitated to give her heart to others despite their struggles. He realized then that he wasn't alone in his fears. Everyone carried some form of pain, but maybe that didn't have to stop them from finding love again. Maybe he had been so focused on his own hurt that he hadn't seen the beauty in healing with others. "That's what I want," Alejandro said quietly. "To be able to trust again. To let people help me." Isabella smiled, the sun casting a soft glow around her. "You're already on your way." The days that followed were a blur of small, gentle changes. Alejandro began to open himself up in ways he hadn't thought possible. He allowed Isabella to visit every day, even though he had been hesitant at first. He let Dolores, his housekeeper, take a more active role in his daily routine, and slowly he found himself sharing his thoughts and fears more openly with Isabella's mother, Teresa, who had become a regular presence in the house. But it wasn't just the emotional healing that had begun to shift. The tingling in his legs, which he had dismissed as a fleeting sensation, returned with more frequency. At first, it was only a slight warmth, as though his muscles were slowly awakening from years of disuse. But by the end of the week, the feeling had intensified. He began to notice small shifts, the faintest flicker of movement in his toes. One morning, as he sat in his study, Alejandro couldn't ignore the sensations in his legs any longer. It was as if something inside him had clicked. He shifted in his chair, concentrating on his legs with a new sense of purpose. He focused on his feet, willing them to move, praying for the slightest sign of change. And then just a fraction of a second it happened. His right toe twitched. Alejandro's breath caught in his throat. Could it be? He tried again, willing the sensation to return. Slowly, deliberately, he focused all his attention on his legs. And this time, the twitch came again, followed by the faintest ripple of sensation. A warmth that spread upward toward his knee. "Isabella," Alejandro called out, his voice trembling with excitement. She came rushing into the room, her face lighting up when she saw him. "What is it, Sir Alejandro?" "I felt something," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am moved." "My toe," Isabella's face broke into a grin. I knew it. I told you, Sir Alejandro. The magic is real. Alejandro felt a wave of disbelief and joy wash over him. Could this be happening? After all these years, after all the failures and disappointments, could he really be starting to walk again? Thank you, Isabella, he said, his voice full of gratitude. You've given me more than I ever thought possible. Isabella beamed at him. I didn't do anything, Sir Alejandro. You did it yourself. You opened your heart, and that's when the real magic started. As Alejandro sat there, his heart racing with the newfound hope that coursed through his veins, he realized that Isabella had been right all along. The real healing hadn't come from magic or miracles. It had come from within, from the choice to trust, to love, and to believe that change was possible. And with that, Alejandro knew that no matter how long it took, he would never give up on the journey ahead. He had already taken the first steps toward healing, and for the first time in years, he was ready to walk the rest of the way. As the weeks passed, Alejandro's life transformed in ways he hadn't dared imagine. What began as a small flicker of hope, a single twitch of his toe, soon grew into something more. Each day brought new sensations, sometimes a tingle, sometimes warmth, and on rare occasions, a faint pulse that felt like the beginning of movement. But it wasn't just the physical change that kept him coming back to Isabella's side. It was the emotional shift, the way his heart began to open again, piece by piece. Like a flower unfurling its petals after a long, cold winter, Isabella had become a fixture in his daily routine. She visited him every morning, her cheerful presence, a stark contrast to the silent, lonely days he had grown used to. And with each visit, she continued to encourage him, not just in his recovery, but in rediscovering the power of connection. You need to believe in the people around you, Sir Alejandro, she would tell him, her voice earnest and full of conviction. Magic isn't just about what happens to you. It's about what happens when you let others care for you too. At first, Alejandro had resisted. His pride had been too great, the fear of needing someone too overwhelming. But now, he found himself letting go of those old fears. He accepted help from Dolores when she offered it. He spent more time with Teresa, Isabella's mother, who was a steady presence in his life, offering him companionship and gentle guidance. And slowly, as he opened up to the people around him, the walls he had built for so many years began to crumble. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden, Alejandro looked at Isabella with a new understanding. Her presence, once a curiosity, had become a lifeline, a reminder that sometimes the only way to heal was to let go of the past and allow love and care to flow freely. You were right, Isabella, Alejandro said quietly, watching as she carefully arranged the flowers in the garden. I've spent so many years pushing people away, afraid that they would hurt me or disappoint me. But now I see that that's not how life works. People want to help, not because they have to, but because they care. Isabella smiled up at him, her face full of the kind of joy that only a child could bring. I'm glad you see that. Sometimes the magic isn't about making your legs work again. It's about making your heart work again. Alejandro nodded, his heart swelling with a warmth that had been absent for so long. I've been broken for so many years, Isabella. But now I feel like I'm starting to piece myself back together. Over time, the changes in Alejandro became more noticeable. The tingling in his legs increased, and he could feel more warmth spreading through his body with each passing day. He still couldn't walk. Not yet. But he felt something more important than that. He felt alive again. For the first time since his accident. One evening, as the sky turned a deep shade of orange and the air grew cooler, Alejandro found himself sitting on the terrace with Teresa. They had spent the evening talking, and for the first time, Alejandro realized how much he had missed having someone to talk to, someone who truly listened. You've changed, Alejandro, Teresa said, her voice soft. I can see it in your eyes. You are not the same man who locked himself away in this house for years. Alejandro smiled, the lines of sorrow that had once dominated his face slowly fading. I don't think I'm the same man either. I owe a lot of that to Isabella, Teresa chuckled. She has that effect on people. Alejandro looked out at the horizon, his thoughts turning inward. I never thought I could trust anyone again, but now I realize that trust is what's been missing all along. Trust, love, and believing in the people around you. Teresa reached over and placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. That's the magic, Alejandro. Not the kind that comes from some miraculous cure, but the kind that heals you from the inside out. As the weeks turned into months, Alejandro's progress continued. Every day, he grew stronger, more confident in his body and in the relationships he was building. It was slow, but it was real. He could now feel the muscles in his legs beginning to respond, and even though walking was still a distant dream, the possibility seemed closer than ever before. One morning, as Isabella arrived for their usual session, Alejandro was sitting by the window, watching the sun rise over the mountains. His legs were still numb, but the energy within him felt different, lighter, almost as though something was stirring deep inside him. "Sir Alejandro, are you ready for today's magic?" Isabella asked it, her voice full of excitement. Alejandro smiled, his heart warming at her words. "I'm ready, Isabella. Let's see what happens." With a mischievous grin, Isabella pulled out a small, colorful flower from her pocket and handed it to him. "This is a flower of courage," she said. "Whenever you feel afraid, look at it and remember that you have the strength to keep going." Alejandro took the flower and held it in his hand, his fingers gently brushing the soft petals. "Thank you, Isabella. I think I need a lot of courage these days." "You already have it," she said simply, her confidence unwavering. "You've been walking toward your magic for a long time, Sir Alejandro." "You just didn't know it." Alejandro looked down at the flower, feeling something inside him shift. He had spent so many years living in fear, in self-imposed isolation. But now, with each day, he was learning to trust, to open his heart, and to believe in the impossible. Later that afternoon, as he sat in his study, Alejandro felt something new, a deep, quiet certainty. He could feel the change in his body, the strength returning to his legs, the warmth spreading through him. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel afraid. With Isabella's guidance, with Teresa's support, and with his own newfound belief in himself, Alejandro knew that his journey wasn't just about walking again. It was about finding a new way to live, to love, and to be the man he had always wanted to be. And so, as the sun set that evening, Alejandro wheeled himself toward the garden, a smile on his face and hope in his heart. Tomorrow, he would take another step toward his healing, toward his future, and toward the people who had helped him rediscover the magic that had always been inside him. As the days turned into weeks, Alejandro's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. What had begun as a hesitant, fragile hope had grown into something solid, something he could almost touch. His legs, once numb and lifeless, now tingled with new sensations, some faint, some strong. Every day, the feeling in his body seemed to return, bit by bit, and each night, he lay in bed thinking about how far he had come, knowing deep down that the path ahead, though uncertain, was filled with possibilities. But it wasn't just the physical change that kept him going. It was the way his heart had begun to heal, the way his walls, once high and impenetrable, had crumbled under the weight of the care and love from the people around him. He hadn't realized how isolated he had been until Isabella and Teresa entered his life, showing him that healing wasn't just about fixing his body, but also about mending the connections that had been lost over the years. On one particularly warm afternoon, Alejandro sat in his favorite spot on the terrace, watching the birds circle above the cliffs. The garden below him, once an afterthought, now seemed to be flourishing, just like his life. The flowers Isabella had planted with him were now blooming, vibrant colors filling the space with life. Isabella had been spending more time at the house, helping him with exercises to strengthen his legs. She had a natural ability to motivate him, her optimism infectious. But today, she was different. She hadn't arrived with her usual excitement, and Alejandro noticed it immediately. "Isabella," he called from the terrace, "are you all right?" She hesitated at the door, her small form standing still. When she looked up, Alejandro saw a shadow in her eyes, a sadness that wasn't there before. "I'm fine," she said quietly, though the words didn't match the expression on her face. She walked over to him, sitting beside him on the terrace without her usual energy. "I've just been thinking a lot." "Thinking about what?" Alejandro asked, his voice soft, concerned. Isabella looked out at the garden, her eyes distant. "About my mama," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She works so hard, and sometimes she gets so tired. I don't want her to be sad anymore." Alejandro's heart tightened. He had seen Teresa's quiet strength, how she always put others first, but he had also noticed the toll it had taken on her. She had a way of hiding her worries, but Alejandro knew that behind her calm demeanor, There was a woman who had sacrificed everything for her daughter. He could see it in the way she cared for Isabella, in the way she smiled, even when the weight of life's struggles seemed too much to bear. I think your mama is proud of you, Isabella, Alejandro said gently. You're the reason she smiles. You bring light into her life. I want to do more for her, Isabella said, her voice trembling. I want to fix things for her, like you're fixing yourself. But I don't know how. Alejandro placed a hand on her small shoulder, offering comfort as best as he could. Sometimes the best thing we can do for the people we love is to show them that they're not alone, he said quietly. You've already done more than you think by being there for her, by showing her that you care. Isabella turned to look at him, her eyes wide with curiosity. But I don't know how to make her happy. I don't know how to make everything better. Alejandro smiled, a warmth filling his chest. You don't have to fix everything, Isabella. Life doesn't always work that way, but you can make a difference by loving her, by being there, just like she's been there for you. And sometimes that's enough. The little girl's face lit up with a hesitant smile, a flicker of hope returning to her eyes. I'll try, she said, her voice steady. I'll keep being there for her. I'll show her that she's not alone. Good, Alejandro said softly. And when you feel like you're ready to do something more, you'll know. Sometimes it's the small things that matter most. The conversation left Alejandro with a quiet reflection. He had spent so much of his life focusing on what he had lost: his legs, his independence, his sense of self. But he now realized that healing wasn't just about regaining what was once lost. It was about finding the connections that had been buried beneath layers of pain, guilt, and fear. It was about allowing others to care for you, just as you cared for them. Isabella's words echoed in his mind as he watched her head back inside, her shoulders a little less burdened, her heart a little more open. She had given him more than she could ever know. She had shown him that love wasn't about being fixed. It was about being whole together. The next day, as Isabella returned for her usual visit, Alejandro was ready. He had spent the morning practicing his exercises, pushing himself further than he had in weeks. The tingling in his legs had become a constant presence now, a reminder that his body was waking up, piece by piece. The hope he had once thought impossible was now within his reach. Isabella, he said as she walked into the room, I'm ready to try something today. Her face brightened instantly. What do you mean, Sir Alejandro? I want to stand, he said, his voice filled with determination. Not just in my chair, but on my own. Isabella's eyes widened with excitement. Really? You're going to try standing? I think it's time, Alejandro replied, his voice steady. I've been waiting for a sign, and I think this is it. I've been waiting for the strength to come back, and I know it's within me. With a smile that could have lit up the entire room, Isabella quickly helped him position himself, her small hands guiding him with a surprising amount of strength. As Alejandro shifted his weight forward, focusing on the muscles in his legs, he felt the familiar sensation of resistance. His legs trembled slightly under the strain, but he didn't give up. Come on, Sir Alejandro, you can do it. Isabella cheered, her voice filled with the same confidence he had given him from the beginning. Alejandro took a deep breath and shifted his weight. His legs responded, first with a tiny tremor, then with a more solid movement. His body swayed, unsure, but he could feel the strength beneath the uncertainty. And then, with one final push, Alejandro stood. His knees wobbled slightly, but he was standing fully, completely on his own. He looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief and triumph. I'm standing, Isabella, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Isabella stood beside him, her eyes sparkling. I knew you could do it, Sir Alejandro. You just needed to believe. For the first time in a long time, Alejandro didn't feel broken. He didn't feel like the man he once was. He was something more. He was whole. And as he took that first, unsteady step, he knew that the journey had only just begun. In that moment, as Isabella's laughter filled the room and the world outside seemed to hold its breath, Alejandro realized that the real magic hadn't been in his legs. It had been in his heart all along. And with each step, he would carry that magic with him, a reminder that no matter how lost or broken you feel, the power to heal is always within reach if only you trust, love, and believe. Asked Chact. The days following Alejandro's first successful steps were filled with both awe and quiet determination. As the weeks passed, his progress accelerated. Each morning, he pushed himself a little further, relying on the exercises Isabella had introduced. To him, the sensations in his legs once faint and fleeting, were now more consistent, and though his movements remained slow and uncertain, there was an undeniable sense of purpose in every motion. But it wasn't just the physical recovery that kept him going. It was the emotional connection that had blossomed within him, a feeling of warmth and gratitude that he hadn't thought possible. Isabella, with her unwavering faith and boundless energy, had shown him that healing wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about finding new ways to be whole. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alejandro found himself sitting in the garden, his legs stretched out in front of him. The warmth of the day had faded, but the quiet beauty of the garden filled him with peace. Isabella was beside him, humming softly as she worked on planting a new patch of flowers. Alejandro could see her growing into a bright, capable young girl, her innocence a stark contrast to the weight of the world she sometimes carried on her small shoulders. "Sir Alejandro," she said, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. "Do you think I could ever be a doctor? I want to help people like you. I want to fix them." Alejandro looked down at her, his heart swelling with pride and affection. "Of course, Isabella. You've already done so much for me. You have the heart of a healer." Isabella smiled, her eyes sparkling with a mix of hope and curiosity. "Do you think I'll ever get to do real magic, like the stories Mama used to tell me?" Alejandro chuckled softly. "Maybe you already have," he said, his voice warm with sincerity. "You've done something for me that no doctor or healer could. You've shown me how to believe in something greater than myself. That's the real magic." Isabella's grin widened. "I like that kind of magic." As the night wore on, Alejandro's thoughts drifted back to the progress he had made and to the road ahead. He had started this journey feeling broken, isolated, and uncertain. But with Isabella's unwavering belief in him, with Teresa's quiet support, and with his own commitment to healing, he had begun to change in ways he hadn't thought possible. His legs still weren't fully functional, but he had taken steps, both physical and emotional, that had made him whole again, in ways that mattered more than he could have imagined. But life, as it often does, had its way of testing even the most solid foundations. A few days later, as Alejandro was practicing his steps in the living room, he heard a knock on the door. The house was quiet, and for a moment, he didn't recognize the sound of the unfamiliar footsteps. "Who's there?" Alejandro called, wheeling himself toward the door. When he opened it, he was met with an unexpected sight: a man in a dark suit, holding a large envelope. His demeanor was serious, and his expression unreadable. "Sir Mendoza?" the man asked. "Yes, that's me," Alejandro replied, his curiosity piqued. "I have something for you," the man said, handing him the envelope. "It's from your ex-wife, Catherine. She's filed a legal claim regarding your assets and your mental capacity." Alejandro's heart sank. Catherine. The name still stirred old emotions: anger, resentment, regret. She had left him after the accident, unable to bear the life they had been thrust into. Now, it seemed, she was coming back, not out of concern, but out of a desire to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. With shaking hands, Alejandro opened the envelope and began to read. His eyes skimmed the text quickly, words that felt like an assault. Catherine was claiming that his decision to change his will and live with Teresa and Isabella was the result of manipulation, that he was no longer of sound mind and had been coerced into giving up his fortune. Anger flared inside him. How could she do this? How could she come after him now? After everything he had been through, after all the work he had put into healing physically and emotionally, how could she possibly claim that he was incapable of making decisions for himself? But as he stood there, clutching the envelope, something inside him shifted. He realized that this was just another test, another obstacle to overcome. For so long, he had allowed other people's judgments to define his worth. His wife, his friends, the doctors, they had all made decisions for him, had all assumed what was best for him. But now he had a choice. Now he could fight for what he had built, not just with his legs, but with his heart. The door creaked open, and Teresa stepped in, her face instantly registering concern at the sight of the letter in his hands. "What is it?" she asked gently, her voice filled with worry. Alejandro did respond immediately. He looked at the paper in his hands and then, slowly, he let out a long breath. "It's from Catherine," he said quietly. "She's suing me. She's claiming that I've lost my mind, that I'm not capable of making decisions." Teresa's expression softened, and she stepped closer, resting her hand on his shoulder. "Alejandro, you've come so far. You've fought for your healing, for your future. This isn't going to break you. I know, he said, his voice stronger, now filled with resolve. I've been broken before, Teresa, but I'm not broken anymore, she smiled, her eyes full of warmth. You've learned what it means to be whole. No one can take that from you. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Alejandro realized, in that moment, that his battle was no longer just about the lawsuit. It wasn't just about proving that he was capable of making decisions for himself. It was about protecting the life he had built, the life that had been healed by love, trust, and connection. I won't let her take this from me, Alejandro said firmly, his eyes fixed on the letter. I've worked too hard to get here. Then we'll fight for it, Teresa said, her voice unwavering. Together, and as the night stretched on, Alejandro knew that he was no longer facing this battle alone. For the first time in years, he had a family he had chosen, one that cared for him not because of his wealth, but because of who he was. And with that, he felt an inner strength rise within him, one that would carry him through whatever challenges lay ahead. Tomorrow, he would face Catherine, but tonight, he would take another step forward, knowing that love, not money, was the true measure of his worth. In the garden, Isabella picked another flower and handed it to him with a grin. You're going to be okay, Sir Alejandro. I know you will. And for the first time in a long time, Alejandro believed her. The morning that followed the arrival of Catherine's legal threat was one of quiet determination. Alejandro's mind swirled with thoughts of the future, of the battle that was looming, and of the life he had fought so hard to rebuild. But as the sun rose over the distant mountains and bathed his mansion in soft, golden light, something inside him shifted. He had been broken, yes, but he had been remade by love, trust, and perseverance. And no matter what happened next, he knew he would not let that be taken from him. He stood up from his chair, feeling the familiar tingling in his legs, the warmth that signaled progress. The sensation was still faint, but with every step, he felt stronger. Slowly, methodically, he moved across the room, his legs a bit shaky, but no longer as hesitant as they once had been. The first time he had stood, it had been a miracle, but now it felt like a testament to his belief that he could still move forward in every way. As he reached the garden, Isabella ran toward him, her face lighting up as she saw him standing. Sir Alejandro, you're walking again. Her voice was full of joy and surprise. I'm trying, he said with a smile, his heart swelling with gratitude. I'm trying. Isabella bounced up and down, her excitement contagious. You're going to be fine. I knew it. Alejandro chuckled softly, feeling a warmth in his chest. He had spent so many years questioning his worth, doubting whether he would ever be whole again. But now, with Isabella and Teresa beside him, with the hope of healing in his heart, he realized how far he had come, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Over the next few days, Alejandro spent his time preparing for the legal battle with Catherine. His lawyer had advised him to remain calm, to focus on presenting his case and protecting his rights. But Alejandro knew that the battle ahead would be about more than just money or legalities. It would be a test of his strength, his ability to stand tall, both literally and figuratively. The day of the hearing arrived, and Alejandro was ready. He had spent the morning in the garden, reflecting on everything that had brought him to this point. He was no longer the man who had isolated himself, consumed by bitterness and regret. He was the man who had learned to trust, to love, and to believe. And that belief, along with the support of the people who truly cared for him, was what would carry him through. As he entered the courtroom, Alejandro felt a surge of confidence. He was no longer afraid of what others might think or say. His worth was not tied to his wealth or his past mistakes. It was defined by the person he had become, by the strength he had found within himself. Catherine, standing across from him, was as poised as ever, but Alejandro could see the tension in her eyes. She had come to fight for what she thought was rightfully hers, but she hadn't counted on the transformation he had undergone. She hadn't counted on the fact that he now had something she could never take from him: his heart, his hope, and his belief that love could heal even the deepest wounds. The legal proceedings unfolded, but Alejandro's focus was clear. He didn't need to argue for his worth. He didn't need to prove that he had the right to live his life as he saw fit. The truth was simple. He was stronger than he had ever been. He was free. At the end of the hearing, Alejandro stood tall as the judge delivered his ruling. The case was dismissed. Catherine's claims had no merit, and Alejandro's decision to change his will and live with Teresa and Isabella was valid. As the courtroom emptied, Alejandro felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had won. But it wasn't just the legal victory that mattered. It was the realization that he had reclaimed control over his own life, his future, his heart, and his place in the world. Back at the mansion, Teresa and Isabella greeted him with smiles that spoke of pride and love. Isabella ran up to him, throwing her arms around him in a tight hug. "You did it, Sir Alejandro," she exclaimed. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said, his voice full of gratitude. Teresa joined them, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You're stronger than you realize, Alejandro. You've come so far." Alejandro smiled, feeling the truth of her words settle deep within him. "We've all come so far, and now we get to build something better." That evening, as the three of them sat together for dinner, Alejandro found himself reflecting on everything he had gained, not just the physical ability to walk again, but the deeper, more meaningful changes that had taken place within him. He had learned to open his heart, to trust others, and to believe in the impossible. And as Isabella chattered about her plans to become a doctor, Alejandro couldn't help but feel a quiet joy settle in his chest. There was a future ahead of him, one filled with love, hope, and the kind of magic that came from believing in the people around you. That night, as they sat together on the terrace, Alejandro looked out at the stars, his heart full of gratitude. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. The road ahead would be uncertain, but he no longer feared it. He had everything he needed: a family, a purpose, and the belief that love was the most powerful force in the world. And as he stood, unsteadily but confidently, and walked across the garden with Isabella at his side, he realized that he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. The magic had never been about his legs. It had always been about his heart. And with that, Alejandro knew that no matter where life took him, he would always have the strength to stand tall, because the real magic was in believing that everything was possible. With every step, he proved it.